Welcome to the ATA Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Baird. Each month on the podcast, we bring you news and insights from the American Translators Association. We look at what's happening at ATA, explore the benefits of membership, and discuss the translation and interpreting professions. You know, the T&I industry is changing rapidly. We hope this podcast will help you keep up with it. ATA was founded over 60 years ago to advance the translation and interpreting professions and foster the professional development of individual translators and interpreters. We have nearly 10,000 members in some 100 countries. If you'd like to know more about ATA, we'll have some information for you at the end of the show. And you'll also find links in the notes. All right, let's start off with a few quick announcements.
Hey there, translators and interpreters. Are you ready for ATA E62? For many translators, interpreters, and company owners, ATA's annual conference is the most highly anticipated event on their professional calendar, not just for learning and getting leads on jobs, but also for meeting and networking with other language professionals. This year, ATA's 62nd annual conference in Minneapolis, Minnesota will be both online and in person from October 27th through October 30th. Registration is open now. Look for the latest at ata62.org or search social media for hashtag ATA62. Also, did you know that more than 70% of ATA members who have listed their services in the directory report getting work through their profile? If you haven't created your listing in the directory, what are you waiting for? Log into your member portal now on the ATA website and set up your profile. Already have a directory listing? Take time to make sure it's up to date. For example, credentialed interpreters can now list what interpreting modes and delivery methods they offer to help potential clients find them more easily. Remember, a directory listing could be your most valuable member benefit. List or update the services you offer now and let your ATA membership work for you. Would you like to get more involved in ATA? Then become a voting member. It's fast, free, and easy. Voting members are not only eligible to participate in elections, they can also serve on committees and network on a whole different level. Plus, it's an opportunity to help shape the future of the association. Just complete the ATA Active Member Review application in your member portal. It takes only a minute and no additional paperwork is required. Find a link to the application in this episode's notes. And finally, did you miss the ATA Podcast Annual Halftime Show? If so, you missed a lot. Listen into episode 60 of the ATA Podcast to catch up on ATA's new ebook, Guide to Starting Out as a Translator, ATA's brand new online certification exam, the new ATA website, an update on ATA's finances, ATA's free Back to Basics webinar series, and a whole lot more. Download it now wherever you get your podcasts. For more information on each of these announcements and more, look for the links in this episode's notes.
Hello, my name is Michael Schubert, and I'm pleased to step in as guest host of the ATA podcast this week while Matt Baird enjoys a well-deserved vacation. I'm an ATA certified German to English translator specializing in corporate communications for mid-sized German companies. I've worked as a full-time independent translator since 2000, and since 2016, I've also worked as an adjunct professor of German to English translation at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey. My pronoun is he. I'm coming to you from my home in San Francisco, California, where they just resumed cable car service after a 15-month pause. So if you hear any ding, ding, ding of a bell in my audio feed, well, that's my local color. The theme of today's podcast is From the Classroom to the Real World, and I'm very happy to have two guests with me who have tremendous insights and success stories to share on that front. Elena Brandt is Assistant Professor of Professional Practice in the Translation and Localization Management Program of the Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterrey. She is also a director on the ATA Board of Directors, serves as membership secretary of the ASTM Technical Committee F43 on Language Services and Products, and is an expert within ISO Technical Committee 37 on language and terminology. Elena's pronouns are she, her, and she joins us from her home in beautiful Monterey, California. Welcome, Elena.
Thank you.
Jamie Hartz is an ATA certified Spanish to English legal and commercial translator. She completed a master's in translation at Kent State University in Ohio in 2015 and is involved with several initiatives of ATA, including the Savvy Newcomer blog and International Translation Day. Jamie currently serves on the ATA Board of Directors. You can find her online at tildalanguage.com. Jamie goes by she and joins us from her home in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Welcome, Jamie.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks for having us.
Glad to have you both. Now, in talking about the transition from the classroom to the real world as students make their way out of university training to professional careers as translators or interpreters or in the language industry, I'd like to ask you first, what do translation schools like MIS in Monterey and Kent State in Ohio do to prepare students for starting their careers, and what might they do better? Jamie, please begin by sharing your memories and experiences from Kent State.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, so in terms of Kent State's program in particular, which is really the only, translation and interpreting program I can speak to, translation specifically, they did an amazing job of preparing us for the work of translation. There were a lot of workshop classes where we had really hands-on experience with texts that have come up for me personally again and again in my freelance work. There was a good variety of different text types, fields of study. We had certain classes for scientific and technical translation versus legal and commercial and things like that. So we got a really good overview of the translation industry and the types of translation that we would be doing as freelancers or as in-house translators. In terms of, more the business side of things, the school and the program had a couple of different initiatives that they would offer to students that I found really helpful. One of them is that a list was kept of different agencies or companies that had offered internships to Kent State students in the past, so that students who were currently in the program could go to that list and take a look at what opportunities might be available for them. It's a 2-year program. Generally, students will complete it in 2 academic years. So you've got 1 summer in between, and a lot of students took that opportunity to get internships, get real world experience, and that internship list was really valuable, I know, for a lot of students. Kent State also does a good job of having 1 or 2 freelancers, I would say, each year or each semester come in and give talks for current students to discuss what it's like being a freelancer, answer their questions and things like that. And while I was there, the school offered as a graduate initiative a little bit of money. I don't remember how much it really was, but a little bit of money to incentivize students to attend conferences. And ATA was, of course, the one that most students were encouraged to attend, especially in their second year.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. That's great information that aligns with a lot of what I know about MIS, and we'll get that input from Elena in just a moment. And thank you also for mentioning the associations and what the university does to create that bond, because we're going to come to more of that later. Elena, I'd like to turn to you now, and if the same question with your perspective inside of MIS, what does MIS do to help prepare students in this transition, and what do you think still needs to be improved?
Thanks very much. I would build upon what Jamie is saying about the practical value of these 2 programs. And my experience with translation training is centered upon my master's degree at UW-Milwaukee and then teaching within the MIS Translation and Localization Management Program. Within the MIS Translation and Localization Management Program, this is a super unique program in the world in terms of the management aspect of translation and localization work. So while there are not that many programs actually available at a graduate level to study translation, there still are, at least within the United States, a few programs where you can study translation at a graduate level. MIS is the only program within the United States where you can learn translation and localization management at a graduate level. And so within the program that we have, students are studying different roles within localization productions that in which they can use their language abilities, but those roles aren't the role of the translator, the person who's producing the linguistic work around which localization services are centered. So within the Miss TLM program, where it's very strong is in its focus on technology. There's students walk away from the program with a really, really strong background and ability in engineering and the different types of translation technologies that they will need to use, especially when going to work in the Silicon Valley, which is just a little bit north of Monterey, where the school is located. And they also have the opportunity to learn about management concepts within localization management. And those are abilities and skills that they can build upon when they choose specializations for themselves as well. The MIS program is also really known for its translation degrees, its conference interpreting degrees. What I would say in terms of what these programs can do, or what translation training can do better, and maybe that our industry can do better in thinking about translation and localization, I would say that something that I've noticed, and I know a few people have noticed, or I know that this is sort of a conversation that's happening more widely than just here. But one of the things that I've noticed is that translation programs and management programs tend to focus on sort of the idea that students are going and maybe going into a really ideal environment, an environment in which translation and localization work is being produced according to the best way that we would hope it's being produced, when there's still a lot of room for improvement in our industry to make sure that the systems that are being built and localized, that work isn't sort of superficial, that when redesigning systems and redesigning work to target a specific locale, we're being sure to take into account how the target location of a person or their target sort of cultural perspective, to make sure to match the localization work to that perspective. If you don't mind, I can give an example really quick.
No, please do.
So I have a really good colleague, Dr. Nancy Tsai, who teaches at the National Taiwan Normal University. And so she and I we kind of go back and forth and discuss translation and localization together. And something that I've been talking to her about and just talking about with other colleagues within the industry is this idea of localization resonance, or designing products in a way, not so that you're just checking the boxes of, oh, yep, I translated it, but really making sure that the product that you're designing resonates with a target audience. Now, that same topic that I'm talking about with her on localization resonance, she came back to me with the idea of cultural ergonomics, making sure that a product is ergonomically fit for the target market, right? So that somebody is not having to struggle unnecessarily when working with whatever content has been translated or localized. So she gave a great example of working through the interface for a banking system, in which she would have to choose different security questions to answer that. Those would be her prompts later on to get a password if she forgot her password. And the topics that she was given, this was in a translated interface. Dr. Tsai is bilingual in Mandarin Chinese and English, and she's super bilingual. But when she received these security questions, none of them really seemed to match her cultural location. So thinking about being asked something like, within a translated interface, what is your favorite pizza topping? But she points out that within pizza might not be the most popular food among Chinese culture. So asking a person who is from a Chinese background what their favorite pizza topping is, it's not, sure, maybe, some people like pizza, but it may not be the best question. It may not be the most culturally ergonomic question that you could ask a person from a different cultural location. And so I think the more that we can do to prepare students that these are the sorts of things that they may be encountering within translation and localization work, and that there might be, some added dialogue that's needed to sort of point out where products are not necessarily culturally ergonomic. I think that's something that within training programs would be a good thing to incorporate and do more of, because training programs are most certainly pointing this thing out, these sorts of things out, at least in some degree.
I think that's a great point, Elena, and I want to definitely second everything you said and add that, in terms of that ideal environment that you mentioned, a lot of times training programs can get kind of heavy on theory and on, meta topics about translation and interpreting. And some of what students need is also just the practical, everyday topics that they'll address as translators and interpreters in their careers. So one thing I would add on the Kent State side, at least, is that a lot of students, feel there might be a little more space for business training, I suppose I would call it, in the training that they receive in these programs. So, how do I start a business? How do I build a base of clients? How do I make my resume? Things like that. That practical side of things can sometimes be built up a little bit better in these training programs.
Here to all of that. I would just add, a couple of things. First of all, Jamie, to what you just said, I teach German to English translation only, but for my graduating students, I always inject at least an hour and sometimes more of sort of a getting started pep talk, because I feel that after 20 years as a freelancer, I have a lot of good advice to give to students, and I know they get that in other classes, but I really feel that I want to give them what I can as well, and the more of that they get from different sources, the better. In fact, recently I even began introducing that as sort of a sidebar for my first semester students, and from here on out, I think I'll just add that to each of the semesters I teach, so that while students are focused on studying and building their language skills, they're also thinking ahead to their career, so that there's not such a jarring transition when they're all done and then need work.
That's fantastic. That's going to tie in with your next question also.
Okay, good. And Elena, getting back to what you said, thank you for all of that super interesting information about the TLM program at MIS, which is a real gem and a great resource. I also know from all of the people I know who work in tech here in San Francisco and down in Silicon Valley, I know that it's great that MIS trains people for that industry, and that the proximity between the campus and Silicon Valley, it's tremendously valuable and important. And all of those aspects you pointed out, I don't think they're generally known and understood even among professional translators.
It's great to know that the Silicon Valley is pulling up from our program for students, and that, yeah, it's awesome to think about the influence that graduated students will have on the Silicon Valley.
Yes, I occasionally have TLM students who come through my class as well, and I love the fact that they're very steeped in tech, because I think just tech, even for people who just pursue careers as translators, straight translators or interpreters, I think technology is so important.
For sure.
Okay, let me sort of ask another similar question. Again, thinking back to your student years and your transition into your career, what experience besides your straight T&I coursework or language coursework proved to be most helpful to your subsequent career? Elena, why don't we start with you?
I thought my experience volunteering with the Midwest Association of Translators and Interpreters, which is a chapter of the ATA, was really crucial to my transition from being a student to being a professional. I joined MATI while I was still a student, and so I got to do some networking before I had even graduated. And then I got really involved there in terms of volunteering and really making sure that I was taking advantage of this time that I had to work with individuals who were, people who were senior to me within the translation and localization industry, who knew the ropes of the industry. I made sure to take advantage of that. And so I I got as involved as I could within MATI. And that really, I got so many opportunities from that. I was recommended for a job based on a recommendation that I received from somebody with whom I had worked at through MATI. So this person had the opportunity to see my work and see the solid reputation for my work that I had built while networking. And so they felt comfortable recommending me for a job. And that job actually gave me a 33% raise in my income too. So that was really awesome. The person who recommended me went on to be, and still I consider, just a great mentor to me in my growth as a professional. And then MATI also led me to joining the ATA because I had such a good experience at my local chapter level. I wanted to get involved nationally with the ATA as well. And it was, I'm so fortunate from what I have gained out of these experiences. And I want to stress that I didn't join these organizations thinking that, oh, I'm going to join and then I'm just going to get all of these opportunities. I went in and definitely got involved and did, I made my contributions by volunteering. But ATA gave me the opportunity to speak at my first conference. I think it was ATA 58. I spoke about project management. It was the very first conference that I spoke at, and somebody happened to be in the audience who saw me give that presentation, who was a professor at MIS, who then recommended me for a teaching job. So the whole reason I have the teaching job that I have now is because I gave a presentation that the ATA gave me an opportunity to give that I otherwise wouldn't have had. And from that, I got a job recommendation. So I just can't speak highly enough about the benefits of joining regional chapters and national organizations, just networking and getting involved in associations.
Wow, thank you for that. That's really astounding.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, we all get a lot, I think, out of our networking and involvement in associations, but boy, you really got a tremendous amount out of it.
Yeah,
so that's a
sure.
best case scenario. Fantastic. Jamie, let me turn to you and ask you the same thing besides your straight T&I coursework. Any particular experiences, extracurriculars, internships that proved to be most helpful to your subsequent career?
Yeah, this is a great question because it really highlights the fact that, like Elena and I, just as an example, have different careers, paths, and different ways that we got where we are right now. But the themes are very similar in that mentorship and getting involved were very significant for me as well. So when I started at Kent State, I was already a little bit involved with ATA because I had met some other ATA volunteers and members at a previous conference who were interested in starting this blog for students of translation and interpreting. And I was, along for the ride and really just willing to get involved and help wherever I could. And I was really the target audience for that blog. So I think they appreciated having me along and appreciated that I was available to help develop this concept of what the blog would look like, be there to write posts, edit posts. And that's, how the Savvy Newcomer was born. And it's been a really great resource for me over the years to learn so many different things, but it was also just a great opportunity for me to get to work with professionals and surround myself with mentors and people who I wanted to become like, freelancers who really were just able to impart to me so much advice by doing and by volunteering and by talking about their work, by being open. So that volunteer work with ATA was really key for me to find mentors where I wasn't really expecting to find them. Like Elena, I didn't go out looking for this. I just was willing to get involved, willing to volunteer, willing to, try new things. And then internships were very similarly helpful to me during my years at Kent State, in that I was able to work with other professionals. I was able to really get a feel for the nitty-gritty of how the day-to-day worked as a translator or as an interpreter or as a project manager. And that hands-on experience was significant for me to be able to figure out where my career path was going to be headed and how I needed to be able to interact with clients, how I needed to be able to develop my skills and things like that over the years.
I would just like to say I use the Savvy Newcomer blog, articles from that blog in a lot of my modules that I teach at Miss. Well done. That publication is awesome.
That's so great to hear. I'm so glad that it's useful and that it's been a good resource, because, you know, that's exactly what we always wanted it to be. And I think it's a really vibrant way to keep students connected with our industry and with ATA.
Jamie, you've touched on a lot of things that I was going to call out anyway, so I'll go ahead and just sort of say them all here together. The Savvy Newcomer blog, of course, you mentioned mentoring, or you both mentioned mentoring. ATA, of course, has a mentoring program. And ATA recently published its guide to starting out as a translator, which is wonderful, which came out just as my last class of students was graduating, and I immediately forwarded it to them. So those are all great resources which you can find easily from the ATA homepage, atanet.org, and which will be linked in the show notes. So thank you for mentioning those. Let me sort of move on with another question. Again, talking about the transition from student to professional. I mean, you've talked about good experiences. Or are there any hiccups that you would like to warn others against? Or are there lessons learned that you would like to go back in time and tell your graduating self about? Elena, let's go to you first.
Yeah, I would, and I think this is something that people often talk about when it comes to failure, that it becomes more personal when you're going through it yourself. So for all purposes, it looks like that I'm in a very successful role, right? I'm teaching translation and localization management. Only 5 years after getting my master's degree, which is something that I am incredibly grateful for. But the path to where I am right now, it hasn't been a straight trajectory for me. When I was first getting on the cusp of graduating with my master's degree, at the time I extended my master's degree so that I could also do a thesis, so that I could keep sort of doors open for myself when considering if I later on want to go to get a PhD or something like that. And so in my final year of my master's degree work, I was also working full time. I was also doing the research to conclude my thesis and get my degree. Right in the middle of that, so I was working as a project manager, probably 8 months before I graduated with my master's degree, I got laid off from the company that I was working with. And so that there was a considerable amount of financial turmoil that I went through. And I think anyone who gets laid off from a job or loses a job, it sort of leads you to question your sense of value as an individual, regardless of how tied the act of losing a job is to your personal value as an individual. My final semester in grad school, I later ended up going back to that job that I had gotten laid off from because they landed an account that they needed somebody who knew Spanish to English translation. My degree was in Spanish to English translation, so I later ended up going back to the same company that I had gotten laid off from. My final semester before getting my degree, I got an opportunity to do another project management job that was a sizable raise, but it was also super stressful to be defending my thesis, going to get my degree in a few short months, and also transitioning from one full-time position to another. And so it was really, really messy for me for a while, and it's continued to be messy. You know, I think people tend to present to others and to present externally. We all want others to see the best of us, right? Or at least when I present myself to the outside world, I want to present the best of what is happening to me. And so sometimes that can lead to this idea that if something is going wrong in your life or in your career, or if things aren't going as planned, that that's not normal or something like that. But it's completely normal. And I wish back then, I think I took it to be much more definitive than it turned out to be. Like losing a job, I took it to heart much more than I sort of wish I would have. And so that would be something I would go back and to just sort of stress to myself, like failure is part of the journey. And yeah, it's perfectly natural to have ups and downs in your career trajectory.
Okay, thanks for that. I think I've got a couple of decades on the two of you, and I can only say life is indeed messy. Embrace the mess, enjoy the ride. But nevertheless, we all would go back and have do-overs. Jamie, your career seems to have taken off swimmingly. Were there any speed bumps that you would go back and smooth out if you had the opportunity?
Yeah, it's funny because once you've graduated and spent a few years in the industry, you get such a different perspective that you didn't have as a student. And I asking this question allows me to think back on that time and realize that I think that a lot of students have sort of a bit of imposter syndrome when they graduate, feeling like I'm not sure that I'm good enough to be doing this. I'm not sure that I have the experience I need. Not really knowing where exactly they fit into the industry. And I think during my time at Kent State, there was also a little bit of a temptation to see my classmates as competitors instead of as future colleagues. Certainly not anything that the school did, but just, each of us were, trying to pursue our own paths and figure out where we fit in. And there was a bit of a feeling of, what if I'm not as good as the next person? For me personally, in all the internships that I was doing, a lot of the work was from English into Spanish, and I knew that I was going to be working from Spanish into English. I worried that I didn't have strong enough Spanish skills, and, I had all these classmates who had been living in Spain or who were from a different country, things like that. I just worried about where my skills lied, and I focused so much on my weaknesses and didn't focus on my strengths. And something I've learned through just learning by doing and through having perspective over the years is that as a freelancer in particular, I really have to play to my strengths. I have to not worry so much about my weaknesses, be willing to acknowledge where they are and acknowledge where I might have blind spots. But just as an anecdotal example, I mentioned that during school I worried about having enough work from Spanish into English versus English into Spanish, and the number of people that were out there in the field, and seeing my classmates as colleagues instead of as competitors. And just in the last couple of months, one of my colleagues from Kent State, who lives in Spain, is a subtitler. She is, of course, immersed in Spanish language and culture, and she's a subtitler from Spanish into English, and has worked with me on a couple of occasions, needing my expertise as someone who's living and immersed in US English. So something that I used to see as a weakness because I am living and working in this US English environment has now become a strength. And so that's something that I would certainly want to tell my graduating self, that, what you see as a negative can really be turned into a positive. Having that strong English skill and having that strong English writing skill can really be a good thing in your career.
Thank you. That's very interesting, and that I couldn't have said it better myself. So thank you for that perspective. Let me ask another question. Elena, you talked before about, of course, the TLM program at MIS and of the many different opportunities one has besides being simply a translator or simply an interpreter. Can you flesh out some of the other career options you think students should be aware of and perhaps consider?
Yeah, for sure. And I will cite research done by Winnie Hay. Winnie is the career advisor for the Graduate School of Translation, Interpreting, and Language Education at MIS. a couple years ago. I'm not sure exactly when it was published, but she has put together this database called the Ecosystem of Language Profession. And this is a database that contains job descriptions for over 50 roles within translation and localization. It's really cool. It starts with an image that groups together different roles according to topics or sort of area of practice. So there are roles in production, there are roles in support roles, upper management roles, sales, marketing roles. And then she's got this list of these 50 different job descriptions where you can click into each one of the job descriptions to see the skills needed for the job. So it's essentially a job description that has the section with skills needed. It also has links to real life people who are practicing within the roles. I've got it open right now. I'm looking at it, so I'll just sort of call out some of the roles that I'm seeing here. It spans from account management, being an audio translator, being a director of localization, being somebody who works in games localization, being a localization engineer, someone who does QA testing within localization production processes. There's so much opportunity, being a terminologist, being a transcriber, being a vendor manager. There's so much opportunity within this industry beyond, I think, the translation and project management roles. At least when I was studying, those were the roles that got the most focus. When I was sort of trying to decide what to do, I was definitely aware that I could be a translator, an interpreter, or a project manager with my degree. And I think it's awesome to see this very long list of other roles that people can get into with their language skills.
Fantastic, thank you. And yes, I will echo your shout out to Winnie Hay in Monterey. She's really a great resource, and I always tell my first semester students to immediately seek her out and make friends
for sure.
with her. Yeah. Jamie, I was intrigued on your LinkedIn profile. I saw that you are part of a translator collective. So I'd like you to tell us whatever you could about that, and also any other alternative career paths aside from being a sole proprietor.
Sure. Yeah. So Elena covered great amounts of information about other career options. And the only thing I'll really add is that recently the Savvy Newcomer has been doing a series of articles on the blog that are actually sort of geared to this topic, but more on the freelance side of things. So as a freelancer, we can offer different services. We're not tied down to simply being translators all day or being interpreters all day. As a translator, I do translation and I edit and I do transcription. So we kind of took the fact that a lot of different translators and interpreters over the past year and a half have seen their work change because of the pandemic, and seen some ups and some downs, and a lot of people have found diversification of their services to be helpful. So this ties into career options, because adding different services is almost like adding, an additional career option to what you're doing, and people don't always realize what kind of options are out there as freelancers. So I mentioned transcription, but we've got posts about language teaching, we've got posts about monolingual editing, copywriting, and I think 4 or 5 other different services that ATA members volunteered to write about for the blog, so that people could kind of learn what options are out there and how you might consider getting started in those different service offerings. And that's definitely something that I would recommend checking out if you're interested in being part of the T&I industry as a student, but maybe not just doing straight T&I work like we were talking about. And then on the collective side of things, glad you asked. I am part of the Black Squirrel Translator Collective. We're called the Black Squirrels because it's the unofficial mascot of Kent State. They have not gray squirrels, but black squirrels in Kent State, Ohio. In Kent, Ohio. But the collective itself is a group of, we've had different people come and go over the years, but right now we have 4 individuals. We're all Spanish to English freelance translators who graduated from Kent State sort of around the same time. So we're at similar points in our careers and we do similar types of work. So we've kind of teamed up together to do translation services and editing services for different clients at times. A lot of times we will edit each other's work, and maybe not primarily, but also significantly, we are, colleagues and friends. So we have a Slack group that we share information, questions, what books we're reading, what TV shows we're watching, and things like that. So it's served as a really great continuation of having the classmate camaraderie from Kent State into our freelance careers, and it's really allowed us to feel like we have coworkers as freelancers, which of course can be a pretty isolating career when you're working from home and don't have official coworkers or other people who are employees with you for the same company. So it's kind of served as both a social and professional outlet for us.
Okay, thank you for that. That's interesting. I've heard people talk about this idea of having an informal or formal collective with other colleagues, or even just with one other colleague. But that's the best fleshed out illustration and description I've heard of it. And, coming from your student days, I think that's the most organic and natural way to form such a thing. So thank you for planting that idea. I think it's a way that students can maybe give themselves more opportunity for attracting work by having a broader face to the public, and also what you alluded to before, seeing their colleagues as colleagues and not as competitors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'll add that if if anyone's interested in learning more about the collective and how we set up, one of the other members of the collective, Victoria Chavez Cruzy, and I spoke at last year's ETA conference, virtually, of course. And so that should be available if you attended the conference to watch. We talked a lot about how we set it up and how things work in terms of like billing and the different types of software we use and security and things like that. So there's a lot more to be shared on that topic.
Great, thanks for that. Okay, so that would be ATA 61, I believe, last year's conference that was to be in Boston and was online and is now still online at the ATA website.
Yep, that's right.
Great. Well, to wrap up now, we've talked a lot about networking and, networking while you're still at university, but above all, networking through local chapters and through national organizations here in America or wherever your home country may be. You were both active on your local chapters. I am also the president of my local chapter in Northern California. And now, of course, both of you are on the board of directors of your local ATA chapter. So I think we've really hammered home on the value of networking and giving back and getting out there and mixing it up, that it even can lead to salaried jobs, as Elena showed. So best case scenario. Any closing thoughts on that, on perhaps maybe what you'd like to see associations do more of, or any other points that they do that we haven't touched upon yet? Elena, let's start with you.
I think I would just in closing really drive home the fact that ATA is an organization driven by volunteers. And so what I would like to see for ATA as we continue upon this really awesome foundation that's been built over the course of, I think the organization has been in existence for at least 50 years now, or longer than that. Hopefully nobody will get angry at me for getting the history wrong.
That's all right. Somebody can fact check that, but I think it's closer to 70. Well,
yeah, that's what I was going to say. Is it closer to 70?
Okay, podcast world, Google it. Okay.
Yes, for sure. So I think the more outreach we can do to just reach broader demographics. So right now we have a membership of around 10,000 practitioners. According to the US Census Bureau, there are around officially 76,000 translators and interpreters practicing in the United States. That number is most certainly low. So the more outreach that we can do to bring aboard all of those 66,000 other translators, interpreters, I think would be really awesome. And I look forward to the growth too in 2 new language pairs, sort of making sure that we're getting membership in languages like Tagalog and Vietnamese and Hindi, languages that are really highly spoken in the United States. I think that will just continue to allow us to advocate on behalf of the profession in a way that's inclusive to translators and interpreters who are practicing in the United States.
Thank you, fantastic. And I would just add that the recent introduction of online certification exams might make the whole process of getting new certified language pairs up and running easier. That's certainly to be hoped.
Yeah, that's an amazing program. That's awesome they were able to get that certification online.
Yeah, that's like a silver lining of the pandemic, I think. And let me just insert a footnote. ATA was founded in 1959.
Nice, thank you, Michael.
Jamie, any closing thoughts on associations, what they do well, what they could do better?
Yeah, I think ATA is really a wonderful home for translators and interpreters who are wanting to further their professional careers, who are wanting to network and things like that. And of course, these T&I programs are wonderful places to raise up those translators and interpreters. And so there's maybe a little bit of opportunity there in the transition where ATA can work hand in hand with the programs and with the professors to make sure that that handoff is seamless and students are getting the support and the resources that they need. A lot of times I think that, ATA and the programs have the resources available, and it's a question of, do the students know where to find them? Do they know what's available? So things like the business practices committees work and the BP forum and the conference and this, the new Getting Started as a Translator ebook and things like that, making sure those things get into the hands of the students that need them, I think is huge. And I'll reiterate again, mentorship is huge. ATA's mentoring program isn't like exactly the way it's set up isn't exactly for students, but the opportunity for students to find mentors informally within ATA exists. So I think that there's lots and lots of opportunities that ATA has to come alongside students as they're transitioning from classroom to career. And like Elena said, everything that ATA does is driven by volunteers. So a lot of that just means that the people involved need to just step up, and we see so much of that happening with the mentoring committee and with the business practices committee and professional development. So I think that there's a lot of really cool opportunities that we have for students to get the resources that they need.
Great, thank you. I can only echo all of that. Well, that brings our conversation to a close. Once again, I would like to thank our wonderful guests, Elena Brandt from Monterey, California, and Jamie Hartz joining us from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. From San Francisco, I'm Michael Schubert. Thanks for listening.
All right, that's a wrap. I'd like to thank everyone who helped produce the show today. Derek Platts mixed and edited the audio. Ben Carl is the voice behind the announcements. And Mary David and Rashawn Paccarel at ATA headquarters provided editorial and technical support. If you learned anything new in today's podcast, I bet there's someone out there who would like to know it too. Don't be stingy. Tell them about the podcast. I've gotten to know so many great podcasts that way. I promise they'll thank you for it. And if you're not an ATA member, listen up. I've been a member for over 20 years. Joining ATA literally launched my freelance career, and I've never looked back. Nowadays, the demand for translators and interpreters is at an all-time high, but finding quality work isn't easy. ATA membership can make the difference. And ATA isn't just for translators and interpreters. Individuals, companies, and organizations can join. We have teachers and professors, hospital administrators, language company owners, technology developers, as well as language companies, universities, hospitals, and government agencies. If you'd like to know more, go to ATA's website, atanet.org. You can also check out past episodes of this podcast where we talk about the benefits of membership and what's currently happening in the association. Thanks again for listening, everyone. Talk to you again soon.